Story number 1. I inherited the old restaurant on West Maple Street in the dead of winter, a frigid January day when the wind off Lake Michigan felt like razor blades against my skin. My uncle, whom I barely remembered from childhood gatherings, had passed away without warning and left the place to me. I wasn't sure if he intended it as a gift or a curse. The building was squat, unremarkable from the outside, with gray brick walls and a faded sign that simply read Maple House. But inside, the rooms breathed a century of history. The floors creaked in protest beneath my boots, the windows rattled in every gust of wind, and the thick smell of stale cooking oil lingered from the most recent owners who'd abandoned ship a few months prior. My uncle, as it turned out, hadn't owned the place for long. He'd purchased it only a year ago. Maybe he realized too late what he'd gotten himself into, but before he could resell it, his heart gave out. That's what the doctor said, anyway. After sorting through his few personal effects, I found a single key labeled basement, do not enter, along with a short note scrawled in his cramped handwriting, don't ignore the voices. I almost laughed at the absurd melodrama. But something in the final curve of his pen strokes made me uneasy. I knew from the local rumor mill, and from the small mountain of newspaper clippings in a dusty filing cabinet, that the restaurant had a darker past. The earliest record was from 1920, during Prohibition, when it supposedly doubled as a speakeasy. The then owner, a man named David Templeton, had used the basement to store crates of illegal whiskey and gin. He employed a skeleton crew of night shift workers to keep the contraband moving, paying them well to keep quiet. One bitterly cold night, Templeton himself was away, and the entire staff, 5 people, vanished without a trace. No signs of a break-in, no bodies, no footprints. The place was simply found locked up in the morning, empty. Police came, but with corruption rampant in Chicago at the time, no serious investigation took place. Neighbors swore they heard screams in the wee hours, but no official report ever confirmed it. The new owners who took over sealed off the basement, claiming structural issues. Over the following decades, Maple House changed hands countless times, always with the same rumor, footsteps echoing underground whenever the first winter snow fell, and sometimes a soft, insistent whisper calling from below, "Come down here." Each proprietor insisted it was just urban legend, until the first snowfall, when they all discovered that legend had teeth. Tenants would flee, or sell, or sometimes just vanish in the night. The building sat vacant for stretches, only to be bought again by some hopeful soul who thought they could break the curse. None succeeded for long. Now it was my turn to stand in the empty dining room, breath steaming, the furnace barely functioning. The tile floor was chipped and scuffed, the once white walls stained yellow from decades of cigarette smoke, and the bar in the corner was dusty, stocked with a few half-empty liquor bottles left over from whoever abandoned the place last. I couldn't decide whether I felt a surge of determination or a spike of terror at the prospect of reopening Maple House. Maybe I wanted to prove I was braver than all the owners who had run. Maybe I was just foolish. My plan was simple: renovate the upper floors, turn the place into a modern eatery, and leave the sealed basement alone. I wanted no part of those old stories. Over the next few days, I hired a couple of contractors who came in, assessed the outdated plumbing, the wrecked electrical wiring, and the general disrepair. They gave me quotes that made me cringe, but I had enough inheritance to cover the basics. Whenever they asked about the locked basement door, I told them to ignore it. I said we'd simply store goods elsewhere. They shrugged. I was the boss. On the third day, the first big snowfall of the season blew in. It was early January, a restless storm that painted the streets in white and made the city look almost peaceful. I was inside the restaurant, wearing 2 sweaters under my coat, consulting with the head contractor about a possible new color scheme for the dining area. At some point, I realized the background noise had changed. The hum of traffic from outside was muffled by the snow, and in the hush, I thought I heard something else. A faint pattering of feet, not upstairs but below. At first, I assumed it was one of the workers. But none of them were in the basement, and even if they tried to go there, the door was locked. I felt a cold prickling on the back of my neck. I glanced at the contractor. He hadn't noticed. Or if he did, he pretended not to. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. I shook it off, telling myself it was old pipes or the foundation settling. Buildings this ancient do all sorts of weird things in cold weather. But deep down, a worm of unease started wriggling in my gut. That night, I slept in the small office on the second floor. The building had no tenants, and I needed to be around for the contractors in the morning. The old radiators hissed, offering minimal heat. Outside, the snow kept falling in thick white drifts. The city lights shimmered through the frosted glass windows. It would have been almost cozy if not for the knowledge that the basement existed below my feet, sealed and silent. At around midnight, I jolted awake. I didn't know why, maybe a dream or the wind rattling the windows. I sat up in the battered old office chair where I'd dozed off. The building was quiet. Then I heard it, a muffled thump from downstairs, followed by the clear echo of footsteps on the tile. At least 2 pairs of footsteps, maybe more. They were hurried, as though someone was running back and forth. Adrenaline surged in my veins. My first thought was that a squatter or thief had broken in, but the doors were locked, the contractors had all gone home, and the brand new alarm system was active. I grabbed the flashlight from my desk and crept downstairs, hard hammering. The restaurant's main floor was dark, illuminated only by faint streetlight seeping in through the windows. Everything looked normal, no sign of forced entry. Then I heard it again, definitely from beneath my shoes, footsteps, possibly barefoot, slapping the concrete or tile. It sounded frantic. I tiptoed toward the basement door. The door was still locked. The old padlock was in place, a thick chain looped around the handle. Yet the footsteps were undeniably there, right on the other side, scuttling around like frantic rats. My palms sweated. I leaned in, pressing my ear to the wood. That's when a voice, hushed yet clear, rose from the other side. "Come down here." I staggered back, nearly dropping my flashlight. My mind whirled. The voice had a strange timbre, a whisper that slid into my brain like cold water. I stood there, uncertain whether to bolt from the building or call the police, or maybe just burn the entire place down. But after several trembling breaths, the voice did not repeat itself. The footsteps stopped. The basement fell silent. Needless to say, I slept terribly, if I slept at all. Morning arrived with more snow piling up outside. The contractors returned, complaining about the icy roads, none the wiser to my ordeal. They continued their renovation work as if everything were normal, while I drifted around in a sleepless fog, half tempted to scold them for not hearing the commotion last night. But I kept my mouth shut. The last thing I wanted was for them to quit out of fear. The next few days proved mercifully quiet. It seemed as though the weirdness had abated, maybe it was just a single, surreal incident triggered by the fresh snowfall. Yet each morning, the chain on the basement door felt colder, as though an unseen hand kept touching it. A small detail, but it made me uneasy. Then came the night of the second storm. This time, it was worse, heavy gusts rattling the windows, snow blanketing the city in near whiteout conditions. I was upstairs again, scouring old receipts and records left behind by previous owners, trying to see if Maple House had any redeeming business angles. Close to midnight, my cell phone chimed with a warning about the blizzard. I looked out the office window. Flakes danced in the lamplight, swirling with a strange, hypnotic grace. The footsteps started just as the wind howled. I rushed downstairs with my flashlight, driven as much by morbid curiosity as dread. The noise was louder this time, more urgent. Thump thump, thump thump, like multiple people running in confusion. The basement door rattled in its frame. My heart pounded. I reached the door and heard voices, a babble of frantic whispers. They overlapped, made no sense. But I caught a phrase repeated several times, "Down here, come down here." I gripped the chain, my mouth dry, every instinct telling me to run. But some force, curiosity, madness, pushed me to fish out the key from my pocket. The one labeled basement, "Do not enter." My uncle's note flashed through my mind, "Don't ignore the voices." For a moment, I felt a surge of resentment toward him for dropping this cursed place in my lap. But I steadied my hands and unlocked the padlock with trembling fingers. The chain fell away. Slowly, I turned the knob. A powerful draft rushed up from below, carrying the scent of stale air and something sour, like rotting fruit. The flashlight beam revealed steep concrete steps descending into darkness. My breath caught in my throat. I could almost imagine figures crouched at the bottom, waiting. The voices had stopped, replaced by silence so thick it felt like a second darkness. I stepped down, each footstep echoing. The temperature dropped with every step until my lungs burned with the cold. At the base of the stairs, I swept the flashlight around. The basement was large, bigger than I expected, maybe the size of the entire ground floor. The walls were lined with old wooden crates, their labels too faded to read. Broken shelves and empty racks suggested this was once a storeroom. Pipes snaked along the ceiling. The air felt heavy, like stepping into a tomb. I saw no sign of intruders, no footprints, no scattered belongings. But the presence lingered, pressing on my nerves like a clamp. My flashlight flickered, as though the battery were failing. In the stuttering glow, I glimpsed something on the far wall, old graffiti or lettering scratched into the cement. I moved closer, heart pounding, to read it. It spelled out, "We're still here." The letters were jagged, uneven, as though carved with a knife in a frenzy. My stomach lurched. A faint scuffling sound behind me made me whirl around. The darkness behind my flashlight beam seemed to shift, like it had shape and intent. My mouth went dry. I whispered, "Hello," but only my echo answered. Then the footsteps resumed, pattering across the floor, too quick to be human. Fear coiled in my gut. I shone the flashlight wildly, catching glimpses of movement, a flicker of a shoulder, a flash of an arm. But whenever I tried to focus, it was gone. At that moment, I heard a voice, clearer this time, as though someone stood just inches behind me. "Come down here. We need you." I spun around, nearly losing my balance. No one stood there. Yet the shadows on the walls seemed to form silhouettes, multiple people, their outlines wavering like smoke. My breath came in short gasps. A chill not just of cold, but of dread, seeped into my bones. My flight instinct finally kicked in. I raced back to the staircase, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. At the top of the steps, I slammed the door shut, locked the chain, and sank against the wall, hard hammering like a drum. What the hell was that? Phantoms of the vanished staff from 1920, still running in circles, calling for someone to join them in their final moments? I barely slept for a week. Every time I dozed off, I saw them in my dreams, vague shapes in a dark basement, beckoning me, voices overlapping in a cacophony of pleas. "Come down here, come back, it's so cold." I jerk awake, drenched in sweat, the wind outside moaning like a lost soul. I considered selling the restaurant, but my uncle's will had a complicated clause that made a quick sale nearly impossible. Besides, a sense of grim responsibility told me that if I ran, I'd only be passing this nightmare to someone else. The contractors noticed I looked like death warmed over, but I gave them no explanation. I forbade them from going near the basement, though they occasionally asked why the door had fresh scratches on it. I told them some animal must have gotten in, knowing full well no living creature could carve deep gouges in hardwood like that. In late January, the biggest blizzard in a decade hit Chicago. The city practically shut down. My workers stayed home. Only I huddled in Maple House, paranoid that the storm would bring the voices back in force. By midnight, snow had piled several feet high around the building. The power flickered off and on, and the radiators clanked in protest. I sat in the office with a battery lantern, flipping through my uncle's old notes, searching for any clue he might have left. Buried among receipts and property records, I found a small envelope with a Polaroid photo inside. It showed the basement door open, with the words "Why didn't I listen?" scrawled in marker. My uncle's unmistakable handwriting. Beneath that, in shaky letters, "They want me to join them." The moment I read those words, the building groaned, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the floor. I grabbed the lantern and stumbled downstairs. The dining room was bathed in darkness except for the anemic glow from the snow-covered windows. The basement door stood wide open. A swirl of freezing air rushed up from below. No footprints in the snow that had drifted in from under the front door. No sign that anyone living had come inside. The door had simply opened of its own accord. I stood there, breath catching in my throat. From below came a chorus of footsteps, frantic as ever, pounding the concrete in a frantic dance. "Come down here," they whispered. "Come down here. We need you." This time, it wasn't a single voice, it was many voices, layered in an eerie unison. The lantern in my hand flickered. I wanted to run. But something rooted me to the spot. It was more than just terror. It was a feeling of grim finality, as though this was always meant to happen. All the owners, all the vanishings, some unholy force bound to the place, hungry for souls whenever the winter wind howled. My uncle had tried to fight it, or outrun it, and failed. Maybe the staff from 1920 had the misfortune of hearing that same siren call. Now it was my turn. I forced my legs to move forward, descending into that black pit one slow step at a time. The air grew colder with each footfall. At the bottom, the basement revealed itself in the weak lantern light, same crates, same broken racks. But now I saw ghostly shapes weaving among the shelves, men and women in old-fashioned uniforms, drenched as though in melted snow, their faces contorted in terror. They flickered in and out of sight, trailing watery footprints that disappeared instantly. The largest cluster stood in the center, near the graffiti that read, "We're still here." Their eyes shone with a hungry desperation. I recognized the garb of Prohibition-era staff, white aprons over dark trousers, short-sleeved shirts, even a bow tie on one man. One of them, her hair pinned back in a tight bun, reached out an insubstantial hand toward me. "You came," she rasped. Her voice layered over itself, echoing. "We've been waiting so long." I froze, blood roaring in my ears. She stepped closer, her form shimmering like a candle flame, mouth twisted in a grimace of sorrow. The others gathered behind her, eyes empty, bodies flickering. I could sense their fear and also something else, a ravenous need. The need to escape their fate by dragging another victim into the darkness. "We tried to leave," the woman whispered, gaze darting to the other staff. "He wouldn't let us. We ran. We thought we could hide." She raised hollow eyes to me. "Now you run. Go, or you'll never leave." Behind them, a shape loomed in the shadows, taller, broader, not quite human. My lantern barely pierced the gloom, but I caught a glimpse of massive shoulders, elongated limbs. Its eyes, if it had any, were lost in blackness. The ghostly staff seemed to cower at its presence. And from that shape, a deep voice rumbled, made of half-formed syllables and cold malice. I felt an unimaginable pressure on my chest, as if giant hands were squeezing my lungs. The woman in the bun let out a keening wail as the shape advanced, and I understood that the staff had been mere pawns, tormented by something far darker. This was the entity that demanded new victims. This was the reason the basement called out whenever it snowed. The staff had likely tried to rebel, maybe tried to flee, but their spirits were devoured. Now it wanted me to join the feast. My heart pounded so violently I thought I'd faint. But the woman's warning rang in my mind, "Go, or you'll never leave." Summoning every ounce of courage, I lurched backward, lantern shaking. The shape hissed, and the staff let out a collective moan. I sprinted for the stairs. The monstrous figure let out a roar that shook the crates and shelves. In the flickering light, I saw a glimpse of something like claws scraping the floor, leaving black streaks. I stumbled up the steps, chest burning with terror. Behind me, the footsteps pounded, ghostly staff giving chase. Their voices rose in a cacophony, "Don't leave us, help us, come back, please." Part of me almost turned around, compelled by pity, but I knew that if I did, I'd be lost. I burst through the doorway, slamming it behind me. My hands fumbled to secure the chain. The voices on the other side grew desperate, then fell away like a receding tide. Finally, silence. The building groaned one last time. I collapsed to the floor, panting. Dawn found me still huddled there, the lantern long extinguished. Snow drifts pressed against the windows, the sky a cold gray. I realized I couldn't stay another night. No one could. Something vile and ancient lived in that basement, feeding on the living each time winter sealed the world in ice. The staff from 1920 had been its victims. My uncle might have escaped the basement itself, but perhaps his guilt or its lingering hold ended his life anyway. With shaking hands, I scrawled a sign and taped it to the door, closed for good. Then I grabbed whatever I could carry, my coat, my phone, a few documents, and fled Maple House. I called my lawyer from a diner across town, ignoring the curious looks from patrons as I sat shaking in my seat, telling him to find any legal loophole to turn the property over to the city or demolish it. I didn't care if I lost every penny of my inheritance. I just wanted that place gone. To this day, I can't pass a snow-covered sidewalk without feeling that prick of terror on my neck, remembering the frantic footsteps, the ghosts calling out to me. Every so often, I check the news, half hoping to see a bulldozer has flattened the building. But no such news appears. Maple House still stands, vacant as far as I know, battered by wind and time. Sometimes, in the dead of winter, I imagine a faint whisper carried on the icy breeze, "Come down here." I close my eyes, trying to will away the memory of those desperate silhouettes, the monstrous shape behind them, and the sorrow in their dead, frozen eyes. Wherever I am now, I always look over my shoulder when the first snowfall comes. I'll never be sure if I truly escaped, or if part of me stayed behind in that basement, forever echoing the footsteps of lost souls in the darkness. One thing I do know, you couldn't pay me all the money in the world to go back there. Some doors, once opened, should remain locked, especially when a centuries-old hunger waits on the other side, beckoning with a voice as chilling as a Chicago blizzard. Story number 2. A phantom rehearsal. I never expected to own a piece of Los Angeles history, but there I was, standing in the middle of the old Montclair Theater on a cold December night. A friend of mine, a real estate broker known for dealing in strange and unwanted properties, convinced me that a derelict movie palace could be the investment of a lifetime. Whether it was a stroke of misguided genius or a reckless gamble, I couldn't say. I just knew that the Art Deco facade and the promise of vintage glamour tugged at my imagination. I saw potential in the soaring lobby ceilings, the curved balcony, the gilded sconces. My broker left out the nastier rumors about what hid in the basement. Probably because if he'd told me, I never would have signed the papers. Los Angeles rarely gets cold, not by Midwestern standards, but that December brought a rare chill. Wind swept in off the Pacific, making the palm trees rattle like old bones. The Montclair stood on a quiet stretch of downtown, an architectural relic dwarfed by modern skyscrapers. Its once neon marquee was rusted, half the letters missing, and the front doors were chained shut. But even beneath the grime, you could see the faint sparkle of old Hollywood magic in the building's bones. I remember the day I finally got the keys. The sun was setting, an orange glow reflecting off the glass towers, and I felt an inexplicable sense of foreboding as I slipped the key into the padlock on those tall wooden doors. They creaked open, releasing a stale gust of air that smelled of dust and decay. My first impression, the Montclair was bigger on the inside than I'd imagined. My footsteps echoed across cracked marble flooring, the plush red carpet long since gone. The lobby soared overhead, a domed ceiling painted with peeling stars and cherubs, remnants of a time when people wore evening gowns to the movies. That first night, I walked through each section, shining my flashlight into dark corners. The main auditorium was cavernous, rows of torn seats facing a massive, tattered screen. My beam caught a flicker of gold leaf along the ornate proscenium arch. For a moment, I thought I saw a shape slip between the seats in the front row, but it might have been my imagination. Dust motes danced in the air, swirling like apparitions in the dim light. I made my way backstage, finding a labyrinth of narrow hallways, dressing rooms with broken mirrors, and a few storerooms piled high with old film reels. Then, near the back, I discovered a locked metal door with a sign so faded I couldn't read it. Something about it unnerved me. I tugged the handle, no give. An embossed plaque above the door read, "Basement, authorized personnel only." I was about to try a set of keys when I heard a scraping sound behind me, like a chair sliding across the floor. Spooked, I decided I'd had enough exploration for one night. The Montclair and I had a rocky start. Over the following days, contractors I'd hired arrived to survey the damage. The building needed everything: electrical rewiring, new plumbing, structural reinforcement. Each professional who stepped inside wore the same expression, a mix of fascination and faint dread. A couple of them mentioned feeling cold spots, especially near the locked basement door. One electrician, a big, stoic guy, asked if the place was haunted. I laughed it off, but the question clung to me like a spider's web I couldn't quite brush away. I soon learned the Montclair's real history through an old newspaper archive. Built in 1928, it thrived as a movie palace until the early 1930s, when it apparently hosted secret screen tests for up-and-coming actors. Only these auditions took place not on the main stage, but in the basement. A producer named Harold Castor, rumored to have unsavory connections, would lure hopeful starlets with promises of big breaks. But some of those aspiring actors never came back upstairs. Rumors flew that they were whisked off to meet powerful studio heads or shipped away to unscrupulous agencies. Others whispered more sinister tales, that they were locked away for private screenings that turned violent, or that the basement served as a front for a prostitution ring. Officially, the investigations turned up nothing. Unofficially, the Montclair's basement earned a dark reputation. By 1935, the place was shuttered. It reopened sporadically under new management but never recaptured its glory. What unsettled me most were accounts of people seeing silhouettes, figures who stood, motionless and silent, near the basement entrance, as though waiting for a chance to take the stage they never got. Old articles described them as shadowy watchers, lingering on cold winter nights. None of the owners could explain it. One night watchman claimed he heard voices calling from below, though no living soul was down there. He quit the next day, refusing to set foot in the building again. Over time, the basement was locked up and forgotten. Weeks rolled by. A sense of unease settled in me. I would arrive each morning, greet the contractors, and concentrate on the main-level renovations. But every so often, I'd catch a glimpse from the corner of my eye, a figure at the far end of the hallway, or the echo of footsteps behind me. Whenever I turned, I saw only the Montclair's dusty corridors. My rational brain explained it away, tricks of the light, my nerves getting the better of me in an old, creaking building. But doubt gnawed at me. Winter nights in L.A. aren't typically cold, yet that year brought an unusual chill. The streets would clear out early, leaving the Montclair's block strangely empty. One night in December, I stayed late, combing through more historical records in the manager's office, a cramped room lit by a single dim lamp. I'd found a locked file cabinet that day, forced it open, and discovered old program schedules, photographs, and scattered letters. As I flipped through them, I came across a faded black and white headshot of a young actress, no older than 19, her hair in finger waves, eyes bright with ambition. On the back, audition for Mr. Castor, basement, December 3, 1932. My stomach tightened. Did she ever leave? The temperature dropped noticeably. I saw my breath plume in front of me, which made no sense. LA nights rarely got that cold indoors. Then the overhead lamp flickered. I thought I heard footsteps somewhere above me, except no one else should have been in the building. My heart quickened. I shut the file, stuffed it in my bag, and left the office, stepping into the hallway that led to the main lobby. My footsteps felt too loud in the hush. As I neared the double doors to the auditorium, I saw movement in the lobby, just a flicker, like a figure crossing from right to left. I froze, trying to calm my racing heart. "Hello?" I called, my voice echoing. No answer. The silence pressed in. I forced myself to walk forward. The lobby sprawled out, its empty concession stand a dim silhouette. The glow from the streetlight seeped through the glass of the front doors, illuminating dust motes in the air. And there, at the far wall, stood a shape, a pale outline in the gloom. It resembled a woman in a long coat, or maybe a vintage gown. She was turned partially away, so I couldn't see her face. My pulse thrummed. "Hey," I managed to say, voice trembling slightly. She didn't move. Didn't speak. I stepped closer, half expecting her to vanish. My mind tried to categorize her as a trespasser or even a hallucination. She raised one hand, pointing toward the corridor leading to the backstage area. Then she took a single step and faded. Not like someone stepping into a shadow, but literally dissolving from sight. My blood felt iced over. I stood there, disbelieving, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The corridor she'd pointed to led to that locked basement door. I told myself I should leave, run out to the street, lock the building behind me. But a pull, like a silent compulsion, drew me to the corridor. Perhaps I needed to prove she wasn't real, that it was a stress-induced mirage. Or maybe, deep down, I believed the stories about lost actors trapped in the Montclair's underbelly. I found the basement door. The metal looked older than I remembered, stained with rust. My set of keys jingled in my shaky hand until I found the one labeled basement access. Why was I going down there? Every gut instinct told me it was a bad idea. But the spectral woman's presence lingered in my mind. I slid the key in, twisted, and heard the click of tumblers releasing. The door creaked open, revealing a steep flight of concrete steps descending into darkness. The air that rushed out was colder still, tinged with mildew and something else, a musty odor that felt older than dust and mold. It reminded me of old costume trunks in the back of a vintage store, only sourer, rank with secrets and neglect. The overhead bulb didn't work, so I used my phone flashlight, each step echoing hollowly. The basement was unexpectedly large, divided into narrow corridors and small rooms. My flashlight picked up odd shapes, an overturned chair, a trunk filled with moth-eaten costumes, broken set pieces that might have been used in long-ago stage shows. I found one door ajar, opening onto a small performance space, like a tiny stage or rehearsal room with battered curtains. The corners of the room swallowed the light, as though the darkness had substance. Something about the layout felt wrong, as if the walls weren't quite symmetrical. I swept the beam across the floor and spotted footprints in the dust. Fresh ones, small, like a woman's shoe. My heart thudded. They led toward the stage. I followed them, my hand shaking so badly the beam jittered. On the stage, a single wooden stool stood under the limp curtain rod, and behind it, a battered old mirror sat on a vanity table. The footprints ended at that mirror. The reflection in the glass was murky, my own face pale and frightened. Then, faintly, I saw another face over my shoulder, a young woman with wide eyes, mouth parted as though to speak. I spun around, phone flashlight piercing the gloom. Nobody there. But the mirror still showed the faint outline of someone's silhouette, flickering at the edges, as though tethered to that spot. A whisper sounded behind me, so close I felt a breeze on my neck. I whipped around again. The phone beam landed on a set of half-rotten curtains. Slowly, they rustled. The whisper intensified, a chorus of voices overlapping, impossible to decipher. One tone rose above the rest, breathy and urgent. "Help us, we never got our chance." Then the footsteps started, rapid, frantic pattering on the concrete, coming from all sides. My pulse roared in my ears. I jerked the flashlight left, right, saw shadows flit across the walls, ephemeral figures in vintage clothing. Their faces were half-formed, eyes pleading. They moved like dancers or actors hitting marks on a stage, swirling around me. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the stool. The voices crashed into a crescendo. "Wait for your turn, we can't go on," he locked the door, never saw the light, "help us," dozens of them, overlapping, distorting, forming a single moan of despair. I ran. My feet slammed against the floor, dust swirling in my wake. The corridors seemed longer than before, the exit door only a speck in the distance. Behind me, footsteps gave chase, echoing unnaturally as though multiple sets of legs pounded the ground. I could swear I felt cold hands brushing my arms, tugging at my clothes, trying to pull me back. My lungs burned. I burst through the door, slammed it shut, and clicked the lock with shaking fingers. In the hallway's relative safety, I slid down the wall, gasping for air. My heart hammered like it wanted out of my chest. Through the door, I heard muffled scratching, faint pleas. Then, after a few seconds, silence. Complete, suffocating silence. I should have left the Montclair that night and never returned, but a part of me refused. I felt somehow responsible, as though these trapped souls, those vanished starlets, desperate young men, whoever else ended up lured down there, were looking to me for release. They were stuck in an endless audition, never granted their moment to shine under real lights. I recalled the actress's photo. How many like her were caught in that purgatory, waiting for a chance that never came? Yet I had no idea how to help them. The next few days, I couldn't bring myself to mention it to the contractors or anyone else. Work continued. I tried to focus on the building's upper floors, hurrying home before dark. But the nights brought dreams of that basement. I saw flickers of a man with a sneer, presumably Harold Castor, beckoning wide-eyed actors through a hidden door. I heard muffled screams behind walls. Worse, I saw that battered stage, the shadows swirling with heartbreak. It was late December when LA's temperature dropped drastically. A rare cold snap settled in, the wind echoing through empty streets. Contractors paused work for the holidays, so I was alone in the Montclair more than ever. One evening, I found myself standing in the main auditorium, gazing at the damaged screen. The hush was deep, broken only by my breathing. That's when I noticed them, silhouettes in the aisle, near the front row, 3 or 4 figures, motionless, each turned toward me. My spine prickled. They looked translucent, wearing what might have been 1930s attire. One of them, possibly the same woman from the lobby, raised a hand as if reaching out. Then, as always, they vanished like smoke caught in a spotlight. I made a decision then. I couldn't just lock them away. I'd try one last time to face the basement, maybe say a prayer or burn sage, any gesture to release them from that wretched stage. I gathered a flashlight, a bundle of sage I'd bought at a local shop, and a half-baked plan to speak aloud to the spirits. Ridiculous, but desperation doesn't care about logic. Around midnight, I unbolted the basement door again. My fear was a living thing, threatening to seize my legs and drag me back. I pressed on, step by trembling step. This time, I lit the sage, the pungent smoke curling around me. The corridor felt colder than ever, my breath a white cloud in the flashlight's beam. I rounded the corner into that hidden rehearsal room. The battered stage loomed. They were already there, waiting, half a dozen figures in period clothing, faces flickering in and out of the gloom. I swallowed a scream. My mouth went dry. Gently, I held the sage out. I don't know if you can hear me, I said, voice shaky. I'm sorry for what happened to you. You deserve better. Please, if you're trapped here, I release you. You can leave. You can, my voice cracked. You can find peace. They stared, expressions unreadable. Then, with agonizing slowness, one by one, they turned toward the stage, as though compelled. A wave of sadness emanated from them, I felt it in my chest like a hollow ache. The swirl of shadows intensified, the edges of the basement flickering in my vision. My sage smoke drifted into the darkness, and the figures began to fade. A new presence stirred. From the far corner, I sensed a deeper shadow, a malignant shape that felt cruel and possessive. If the ghosts were merely echoes of victims, then this was their captor. Cold radiated from it. I tightened my grip on the sage, heart slamming in my ribcage. Leave them alone. I shouted, tears burning in my eyes. I had no idea what else to do. Maybe stand up to it, show no fear, just like in every ghost story. The darkness roiled. My flashlight flickered. A roar filled my ears, a cacophony of moans and wind. I felt something slam into my chest, knocking me backward. My head cracked against the old wooden stool, lights exploding behind my eyelids. Everything spun. The last thing I saw before blacking out was the group of ghostly figures stepping onto the stage, their eyes locked onto me with silent pleas. I woke up sometime later, minutes, hours, I couldn't tell, lying on my back, head throbbing. The basement was dark, silent. My flashlight lay a few feet away, its beam weak. The sage was out. The door to the corridor stood ajar. Staggering upright, I realized the oppressive cold had lifted. My breath still came out in faint clouds, but the air felt lighter. I picked up the flashlight and looked around. No silhouettes, no swirling shadows. The battered stage remained empty. On the vanity, the mirror was shattered into spiderweb cracks. I limped upstairs, locked the basement door behind me, then collapsed in the lobby. By the time the sun rose, I decided I'd had enough. Even if the Montclair was salvageable physically, spiritually it was broken beyond repair. Or maybe it was finally free, maybe confronting that evil presence allowed the trapped souls to slip away. Either way, I couldn't continue. I sold the Montclair Theater within the month to an entertainment company who planned to gut the interior and convert it into a modern performing arts space. I didn't share my experiences in detail, I just told them I was in over my head. The new owners bulldozed half the building, renovated the rest. If there were any ghosts left, perhaps they faded with the old walls. Or maybe they still linger in hidden corners, waiting for a chance to take the stage. Sometimes, late in December, when the wind grows unseasonably cold in Los Angeles, I think about the Montclair. I picture those young faces, hungry for stardom, lured into that cursed basement. I wonder if they ever found release. Or if, on the darkest winter nights, they still gather by that locked door, rehearsing lines in a ghostly hush, waiting for a spotlight that never comes. When I close my eyes, I can still see them, shadowy forms in evening wear, standing quietly, hoping that this time, they'll step onto a stage where their dreams don't end in darkness. Wherever they are, I pray they're at peace, that the final curtain has fallen on their tragedy. And I hold onto a small, guilty relief that I escaped, if only barely. Some stories can't be undone. Some performances never get their standing ovation. I left the Montclair behind, but I know a part of me will always be haunted by the memory of that basement, its tiny stage, the chill in the air, and the ghosts of those who never made it out. Story number 3. Snowbound Secrets. I never thought I'd end up in Fargo, North Dakota. My wife, Rebecca, had gotten a job offer she couldn't refuse, and we were tired of life in the overpriced cities. So we packed our possessions, our 2 kids, Noah and Carly, and headed north to a place famous for bone-chilling winters and fierce blizzards. The house we found was older than we'd hoped, a creaky wooden structure perched at the edge of a quiet neighborhood. The realtor called it rustic charm. Now, as I look back, I wish I'd listened to the tiny voice in my head that whispered, something about this place is off. In late November, when the temperatures started dropping fast, we discovered the first hint of something wrong. The basement refused to warm up. It was the kind of basement you'd see in horror movies, narrow stairs leading into a space half dug into the earth, with old stone walls and a single overhead bulb. Even on days when the furnace rumbled and the rest of the house felt like a sauna, the basement remained icy, its chill seeping through the floorboards. Rebecca and I chalked it up to poor insulation. But deep down, I felt something else, a pervasive cold that sank into my bones whenever I stepped down there. We tried everything, installing better insulation around the water pipes, sealing the cracks in the windows, adding a space heater. Nothing worked. The basement stubbornly remained sub-zero. By January, Fargo's brutal winter was in full swing, and our basement was like a frozen tomb. Every time I went down to check the furnace or grab something from storage, I felt watched. It was easy to dismiss it as paranoia. After all, it was a grim space, gray walls, dirt floor in some sections, and an unused coal chute in the corner. I'd hurry up the steps, leaving that weird chill behind. One night, the wind howled outside, carrying loose snow against the windows in sharp rasps. The kids were asleep, Rebecca was reading in bed. I lay awake, heart oddly restless. Something gnawed at me, maybe the sense of not fully settling into this house, or maybe the knowledge that even though the furnace raged, the basement was dead cold. I decided, in a moment of stubborn irritation, to go down there again. Maybe I could find a hidden window or vent letting in outside air. The second I cracked open the basement door, a blast of frigid air hit me in the face. My flashlight cut a thin beam through the darkness as I descended the wooden steps. Each creak felt loud enough to wake the whole house. I reached the concrete floor. The overhead bulb hummed, casting weak light. My breath plumed out in white wisps, so cold I might as well have been outdoors. I swept the flashlight around the walls, half expecting to see visible cracks or even a chunk of missing stone. Instead, I spotted something odd near the far wall, a faint line, like the outline of a doorway. I blinked, stepping closer. The basement stone walls were old, but the mortar around this outline looked fresher, like it had been resealed in a hurry. An odd sense of unease clutched at my chest. Why would anyone seal off a doorway in a basement? My curiosity surged. Using a small hammer and a chisel I found in a disused toolbox, I tapped at the mortar. Chunk by chunk, stone chips fell away. Within minutes, I'd exposed the edge of a hidden wooden door. The temperature dropped further, as though the cold itself was emanating from behind it. My hands trembled, half from the icy air, half from apprehension. The door had no handle, just a simple iron latch. I fumbled at it, convinced it might be locked, but it wasn't. With a groan, the latch turned, and the door creaked inward. A gust of freezing wind blasted my face. The beam of my flashlight flickered across a dark, cavernous space. From somewhere in that blackness, I smelled stale air, a faint chemical odor like old antifreeze, and something else, something sharp and wintry, a smell I couldn't place. I steeled myself and stepped through. The air was colder than a freezer, biting into my skin. My feet found a rough stone floor, lightly dusted with frost. How could a room be this cold without external venting? I couldn't see my breath anymore. My breath froze so quickly it felt like stepping outside during a polar vortex. The flashlight revealed walls coated with a thin layer of ice, glistening in the weak light. Whoever built this place had carved out a hidden chamber behind the basement wall. But why? I ventured deeper, each step echoing softly. A soft crunch underfoot made me look down, thin shards of ice, scattered like broken glass. My heart pounded. The light swung across the space and landed on a shape at the far end, something large and white, vaguely humanoid. At first, I thought it was a statue made of snow. Then I realized it was only one of several. They were grouped in a corner, silent and eerie. My mind raced, trying to piece it together. Snowmen? Down here? In a hidden freezing room? Moving closer, I tried to see if they were actually snow or just plaster figurines. The surface was granular, flecked with ice crystals. They ranged in size, some short, some tall. A chill I couldn't blame on the temperature gripped my spine. The shapes had faces. Crude lumps of ice that suggested eyes, a mouth, a nose. The craftsmanship was uncanny, as though someone sculpted them to resemble real people. The flashlight beam trembled in my hands. I'd never seen anything so bizarre. Then I noticed something else. These faces weren't random. They looked like the faces of my family. Noah's wide-eyed stare. Carly's round cheeks. Rebecca's half-smile. And, oh God, one of them had my own features, the brow furrowed in perpetual worry. My knees almost buckled. It was like peering into a lineup of twisted reflections. This can't be real. It can't. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over another figure. Its blank ice-formed eyes glared at me. I had to bite down a scream. My breath came in ragged gasps, creating tiny clouds that quickly vanished into the freezing air. Who made these? Why? My flashlight flickered, and I felt a prickle of panic. The last thing I wanted was to lose my only source of light in this horrifying tomb. One of the figures at the back, tall, looming, had no face at all. Just a smooth, featureless surface. My flashlight picked up faint lines, as though someone started to carve it, then gave up. Or maybe they were waiting for someone else's face to copy. A jolt of terror shot through me, and I swore I felt a presence behind me. Whirling around, flashlight held high, I saw only the open doorway. But in the corner of my eye, I thought I saw a flicker of movement among the snow figures, like one of them had shifted an inch. My mouth was bone dry. I inched back, trying not to make a sound. Fear churned in my stomach, a dread I'd never known before. Slowly, I exited, not daring to turn my back completely. Once I stepped over the threshold, I slammed the hidden door shut, fumbling to latch it. Immediately, the temperature felt a fraction warmer, though still frigid. I stood there, panting, my mind ablaze. I have to tell Rebecca. Then another thought, no, I can't tell her. She'll think I'm losing it, or worse, she'll demand we leave. And maybe we should. But something in me resisted the idea of fleeing my own house. Could I handle the truth of whatever was behind that door? The hideous snow effigies of my family stood in that freezing chamber, a silent threat or a warning. My hands shook as I made my way up the basement steps. That night, I slept fitfully. Rebecca complained about the noise I made rummaging around, but I said I was just checking the furnace. She mentioned how she'd been feeling strange drafts around the house. I kept silent about the chamber, the snow figures. I needed time to think. But my dreams were plagued by visions of my family's frozen faces, their ice lips parting in a scream I couldn't hear. The next morning, the kids went to school, Rebecca went to work, and I loitered in the living room, mind spinning. Part of me wanted to seal that door forever, bury it under bricks, pour concrete. Another part felt compelled to discover what was behind this twisted phenomenon. By midday, I decided to at least check if those snow figures were real or just a product of my exhausted imagination. I grabbed a camera and a crowbar. Don't ask me why the crowbar, maybe it made me feel safer. I descended into the basement again. The air felt even colder, as though the presence of that hidden room had leached warmth from the house overnight. My flashlight revealed the same faint outline in the wall. My heart thumped. With a trembling hand, I unlatched the door. The freezing wind rushed out. I stepped inside. No question now, the snowmen were real. Their forms remained exactly as I remembered. I used the camera, took several pictures, each flash revealing grotesque detail, the lumps of ice where eyes should be, the forced smiles. I forced myself to approach the one that looked like me. The resemblance was uncanny, same shape of the jaw, same short haircut, if you could call those icy ridges hair. I felt an overpowering urge to destroy them. But fear paralyzed me. What if that made things worse? What if there was something alive in them? Then I heard a crunch behind me. I spun, crowbar raised. One of the figures had shifted position. I was sure of it. A trail in the frost on the floor showed drag marks, like it had moved an inch or two. My mind reeled. That's impossible. A moment later, the overhead bulb, somehow working in this secret room, flickered. I heard a faint whisper, like wind through a hollow space. It formed something that almost sounded like my name, Ga-R-Y. I lost it. I backpedaled, stumbling into the other snow sculptures. They toppled, hitting the ground with a soft thud, spewing a spray of ice crystals. The faces broke apart. The overhead bulb dimmed to an orange glow. I swear one of the broken figures moaned, but I refused to believe my ears. Fear fueled my legs as I sprinted for the door, crowbar clattering on the floor behind me. Once out, I yanked the door shut so hard I nearly dislodged it from its hinges. Then I hurled a pile of bricks and old junk against it, my chest heaving. Sweating despite the cold, I stared at the basement steps, adrenaline crashing over me. If that place was somehow alive, or if those snow figures were some twisted entity, I wanted to seal it off forever. But I also needed to protect my family. If those things mimicked us, did they pose a threat? The face with no features, was it waiting for Noah's, Carly's, or even Rebecca's likeness? I rushed upstairs, locked the basement door, and debated calling the police. But what could I say? That there's a secret room full of living snow people? They'd think I was insane. The house fell into an uneasy silence, broken only by the muffled roar of the furnace. I felt powerless and alone. That evening, Rebecca arrived home with the kids, complaining about the biting cold in the living room. It's never been this chilly before, she said, rubbing her hands. Noah and Carly looked pale, their cheeks red from the frosty air outside. Both complained that they were tired, their fingers numb. I cranked up the thermostat to no avail. Dinner was a tense affair. The kids bickered, and Rebecca noticed my jittery state. She asked if I was feeling okay. I forced a laugh, blaming the weather and a bad night's sleep. Every minute, my mind was on that door, that hidden chamber. I felt like at any second, something might burst through the basement and invade our home. Night settled in with a ferocious wind that rattled the windows. The temperature plummeted even further. Around 10 p.m., as Rebecca was tucking the kids in, I heard something from the basement, a dull thud, followed by a series of scraping sounds. Each scrape sent goosebumps across my skin. I locked the bedroom doors, told Rebecca to stay with the kids. Then, flashlight in hand, I forced myself downstairs one more time. The basement door at the top of the stairs was ajar, even though I'd locked it. My heart raced. Ice crystals glittered on the doorknob, and a faint track of frost led across the floor toward the furnace. I flicked the flashlight beam around. The hidden room's door was wide open, the junk I'd piled against it shoved aside. A wave of Arctic air drifted out, carrying tiny snowdrifts. My entire body shook. Something came out. The scraping noise repeated, coming from near the furnace. I inched forward. My breath caught in my throat when the beam revealed a tall, human-like shape, half snow, half ice, standing beside the furnace as though it was steadying it. Its head jerked in my direction. In the flashlight glow, I saw a half-formed face, blanched, featureless except for indentations where eyes might be. It was the incomplete figure from the chamber. It turned fully to me, freezing lumps shifting as it moved. My knees threatened to give. The thing raised an arm, if you could call that rough, segmented ice an arm, and pointed. Its mouth opened, a small, dark fissure. A hollow moaning sound escaped, sending tremors of terror through me. I backed away, praying it wouldn't follow. Behind it, the basement door leading to the secret room groaned as if under strain, and I caught glimpses of other shapes emerging. I bolted up the stairs, nearly tripping. Once in the hallway, I slammed the basement door and braced my weight against it. The wood rattled under a sudden thud from the other side. They're trying to come up. My mind was a whirlwind. I'd never felt such raw panic. Rebecca appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. "Gary, what the hell is going on? Get the kids. We have to leave, now," I shouted, voice cracking. She opened her mouth to question me, but something crashed against the door again, and she saw the terror on my face. Without another word, she sprinted upstairs. I grabbed my keys, shaking like a leaf. Another crash, and I heard that unearthly moan again, echoing from the basement. Moments later, we had the kids bundled in coats, tears streaming down their confused faces as we ran through the living room. The basement door splintered behind us with a final crash. I dared not look back. We burst into the bitter Fargo night, a fresh layer of snow crunching under our boots. The wind cut our faces. Noah sobbed, Carly trembled. Rebecca clutched him close. My pickup was parked out front, half buried under drifts. We piled in, the engine protesting the cold. I fumbled with the ignition until it roared to life. Headlights illuminated the swirl of snow. As we sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror. The house stood in darkness except for one feeble porch light. But for a split second, I swear I saw movement in an upstairs window, a pale shape staring out at us. We drove across town to a motel, hearts still in our throats. Rebecca and the kids were safe, at least for the moment. I told the clerk our furnace broke, and we needed a place to stay. Once we were in the motel room, I tried to calm the kids. Rebecca demanded an explanation, tears in her eyes. I hesitated, then told her everything in a shaky whisper. She stared in disbelief, but my trembling voice and pallid face must have convinced her something truly awful lurked under that house. We stayed up all night, listening to the wind shriek. None of us dared sleep. By morning, the storm had subsided. The world outside was a pristine sheet of white. Rebecca insisted we call the police, maybe a contractor, to check the basement. But I knew what they'd find, a destroyed basement door, possibly evidence of forced entry. Would they believe I saw living snow figures? That was insane. Yet I couldn't let them stay in that house, not with whatever those things were. In the end, we decided to return only to grab essentials. We drove back, the kids clutching each other in the back seat. When we pulled into the driveway, the house looked deceptively normal, as if nothing had happened. The basement window was frosted over, a thin wisp of cold air escaping through a crack. My guts churned. We hurried inside, found the basement door broken off its hinges. The kids cowered behind Rebecca. The entire main floor was chilly, like a fridge. I could see my breath. From somewhere in the vents came a soft hiss, as though the furnace still ran. Against my better judgment, I crept to the basement steps. Empty. The hidden door in the wall was shut again, but fresh shards of ice lay around it. Footprints, if you could call them that, melted shapes in the floor's frost trailed back inside. My skin crawled. They returned. Something tugged at me, a sense that if we didn't destroy that chamber, we'd never be safe. The kids, huddled in the living room, whimpered each time the wind rattled a window. Rebecca gave me a look that said, "We are not staying here." I agreed wholeheartedly. We packed clothes, valuables. I grabbed a can of gasoline from the garage, not fully sure what I planned to do with it. Maybe burn the basement, burn the entire house. But part of me hesitated. Arson? That was a line I never thought I'd consider crossing. Finally, we just left, hearts pounding, locking the house behind us. I told Rebecca we'd check into a long-term rental or find another place. She never argued. We spent hours calling realtors, making excuses about a foundation issue that required us to move. The kids, traumatized, refused to go near the idea of returning. Days turned into weeks. Fargo's winter roared on. We eventually found a rental home in a different neighborhood, cozier and new. I thought about that hidden basement room every time a cold draft swept through. Sometimes, at night, I'd wake in a sweat, dreaming of ice creatures with our faces. We never told the neighbors the real reason we fled. The old house? It sat vacant, unsold, its secrets locked away in the frozen depths. Rumors spread. Some contractor who went to check the property reported the basement was colder than outside, that he saw strange ice formations. Word got around that the place was haunted. Maybe it is. Maybe it's something worse. I don't know if the snow figures are still there, waiting for new owners to mimic, or if they've collapsed back into frost. Sometimes, I think about that unfinished face on the tallest figure. Did it ever complete itself using some poor soul's likeness? I only know one thing: I'll never set foot in that house again. We left Fargo once Rebecca's job allowed a transfer. We moved south, chasing warmer climes. To this day, when winter arrives, I get jumpy. A chill wind can make my heart race, conjuring memories of those silent, frozen doppelgangers in the secret room. The kids sense my fear, though I try to hide it. And at night, I lie awake wondering, if I'd opened the door just a little later, would I have found them creeping up those steps, their ice fingers reaching for my family? Whenever the forecast calls for snow, I think of that hidden chamber in Fargo, and I see a vision of those icy faces. My own face carved in frost, smiling a dead smile in the winter darkness. And I pray that house remains empty forever, its secrets locked behind a basement wall that leads to a place no one should ever see, where the cold never dies, and neither do the nightmares.